I'm Femi OK. This is Inside Africa, your weekly look at life and issues on the continent. In the show today. Ooh, it was quite a party. Ethiopia celebrates the millennium. Yes, you heard it right. The year 2000 has just arrived there. We'll explain why it took so long. Also ahead, thousands of Liberians living in the United States win a reprieve. We'll talk to Liberian President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf about her efforts to keep them from being sent home. And from the mean streets.
Try to get something to smoke, try to get some money, smoke. The life you're living is smoking, drugs, crime, crime.
To a hot stove. A former gang member shows how cooking and a program started by the celebrity chef Jamie Oliver put him on the right path. But we begin in Ethiopia, where revelers saw in the new millennium with what can only be described as an extravaganza. Robin Kono has more.
The rest of the world celebrated the millennium more than 7 years ago, but Ethiopia marked the year 2000 on September the 12th this year. And like any new year, the people partied. The celebrations included a concert in the capital Addis Ababa, where US pop group Black Eyed Peas joined a lineup of Ethiopian stars, though the price of tickets was well beyond the reach of the average Ethiopian. Billed as a uniquely African occasion, the festivities were a chance to forget the troubles in the Ogaden, where a revolt is brewing, and the quagmire in neighbouring Somalia, where thousands of Ethiopian soldiers are supporting the transitional government. Prime Minister Meles Zenawi focused on the fresh start a new millennium offers.
1,000 years from now, when the Ethiopians welcome the 4th millennium, they shall say that the eve of the 3rd millennium was the beginning of the end of the Dark Ages in Ethiopia. They shall say that the eve of the 3rd millennium was the beginning of the Ethiopian Renaissance.
Many Ethiopians from around the globe returned home to join in the celebrations.
I'm celebrating something that comes once in 1,000 years and which is unique to Ethiopia. This generation is a lucky generation to get the chance to see the millennium.
Ethiopia is the only country in the world that still follows the ancient Orthodox Coptic calendar, which is 7 years behind the more commonly used Gregorian calendar. But for Ethiopia's Muslim population, some 40 million people, the celebrations didn't mean much. But for the rest of the country, this was the beginning of a new era. Robin Kono, CNN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Ethiopia is almost 8 years behind most of us because it follows a version of the Julian calendar which was used in Europe until the year 1582. And that was the year that Pope Gregory ordered a revision that led to the creation of the Gregorian calendar, which is the current standard in most countries. Ethiopia's main religions, the Coptic Church and the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, chose to keep their own calendar. They believe it correctly reflects that Jesus was born 2,000 years ago. The Ethiopian calendar contains 12 30-day months, plus a 13th month that usually lasts 5 days. That's my kind of working month. In leap years, the 30th month contains 6 days. So now you know, I'll be testing you later. Here's a quick look at some of the headlines on the continent this week. Sudan's president says he's willing to start next month's Darfur peace negotiations in Libya with a ceasefire. Omar al-Bashir made the comments during a visit to Italy, where he met with the Prime Minister and the Pope. A top Sudanese rebel leader has refused to negotiate until a ceasefire is in place. Human Rights Watch says Central African Republic soldiers have massacred hundreds of civilians since the middle of 2005, forcing scores to flee their homes. A new report says the elite presidential guard is behind most of the killings, but it says rebels and bandits are also responsible. Human Rights Watch says the worst violence happens near the CAR's northeastern border with Sudan. Health officials in the Democratic Republic of Congo are trying to contain the country's first major Ebola outbreak in 12 years. The hemorrhagic fever has killed at least 5 people, and disease experts are investigating more than 160 deaths. Ebola is fatal in 50 to 90% of cases. Opposition challenger Ernest Koroma appears headed to victory in Sierra Leone's presidential runoff. His All People's Congress had already won a majority in the parliament in the first round of voting. Many Sierra Leoneans are dissatisfied with the country's slow pace of progress. As Nick Valencia reports, corruption and extreme poverty are among the biggest problems facing the next administration.
These are tense times in Sierra Leone. An outbreak of political violence just days before the second round of voting for president, triggering painful memories. It's the nation's first election since the departure 2 years ago of United Nations peacekeepers, who helped restore order after a vicious civil war.
Well, before the first round, things were relatively peaceful. It was between the first round and the second round that we saw outbreaks of violence. A lot of people were very nervous about that, even on election day.
Election day itself was generally orderly and peaceful, and the vote is ultimately being seen as a success, despite reports of some voting irregularities.
So there were problems, but most international observers, including the EU, say overall the election was fair enough, and they don't believe these problems will be serious enough to affect the outcome of the election.
Analysts say the very fact that this presidential election resulted in a runoff is an indictment of the perceived lack of progress achieved by the government of Ahmad Tijan Kabal.
Future politicians and aspiring public figures need to take their responsibility seriously, because if they don't, then the people will hold them accountable.
Whoever takes hold of the reins of power has a long to-do list. Racked by 10 years of civil war, this country of 5 million is struggling with 70% unemployment and a crumbling infrastructure. Reliable electricity and water is a distant dream for many.
People say they want change, and they're very, very passionate about that. And so I think they'll be looking and waiting to see what the new administration is going to do.
The big question now is this: will the losing side peacefully accept the outcome and allow this country to continue its long and painful recovery from a decade of civil war? Nick Valencia, CNN, Atlanta.
Now here's a look at some of the iReport images we've received this week. Thank you to Zephaniah Yaru, who sent in these photos of floods in Maiduguri in northeast Nigeria. My colleague at the Nigerian Met Office tells me the storms usually originate in Sudan and get stronger as they move further towards the north. And floods hit Nigeria every year, but this year they've been especially severe. The forecast is for much better conditions as the rain eases off. Now, if you have a picture story you'd like to include on Inside Africa, please send us your photos or videos from the continent. Just go to cnn.com/Inside Africa and click on the iReport section. Aid workers in eastern Congo struggle to cope with a rising tide of displaced people. Ahead on Inside Africa, fighting drives thousands from their homes and raises fears of a wider conflict. And a young South African finds his passion and a much brighter future in the kitchen. See you on the other side.